Each of the tracks which we create, either in a row or a column, has these numbered grid lines between them. These grid lines begin at 1, which is the start of the track, then continue along the grid direction to the end of the track. Here we see we have our column tracks numbered from 1 to 5, and the rows numbered from 1 through to 4. But why do we need to know this? Well, we can use these grid line numbers to position an element exactly where we want it to be on the grid. We use grid row start, grid row end, grid column start, and grid column end to specify the starting and end positions across each axis where we want to place an element. Here we have an element between lines 2 and 3 on the row, and then between lines 3 and 4 for the columns. Let's go over to the text editor and give this a go ourselves. To begin, I'm going to replicate this grid from the slides. So up in the grid template columns, let's add a repeat. So let's remove the min max, and then this time add repeat, and simply add 4 columns at 1 FR each. And then for the rows, we can repeat 3 at 1 FR2, and these are going to be all equal. To better see this in action, we also need some more items. So let's copy one of these divs for the items and then paste it in. And let's go for 12 items. So 8, 9, 10, 11, and then 12. And there's our 12 items on the screen. Positioning with these grid lines will be the first properties we have covered so far, which apply to the item rather than the container. So I'm going to change the class on one of these items. So let's go over to the items and let's go for this one and change this to be item 1. And then change the background color in the CSS so this stands out a little bit more. So item 1, and go for the background color. This can be anything, but light blue is fine. Then refresh, and now we have one item which stands out. Great, we're now good to start working with this one item. Starting with the example from the slides. If we go to our item 1 CSS, we can begin with grid row start, which we've seen in the slides, and this is the starting position on the row. So let's go for position 2. Then we need to also add grid row end for the end position. Again, going off the slides, this is position 3. And then the same for the columns. So grid column start, position 3, grid column end, position 4, and over to the browser. So notice how this item 1 has moved, and all the rest have adjusted and still stayed in order. These grid lines can be any number to place this item anywhere on the grid, or it can even span multiple rows and columns. If we wanted this blue item to also take up the row below it, we could go over to the CSS and change the grid row end, this time to be number 4, reload, and now it spans across 2 grid rows. Same with the columns too. If we wanted the item to also span across the column to the right of it, we could just simply adjust the numbers for the grid column end to be number 5. And there we go. And still all the other items will flow and also keep in order. There is also some shorthand syntax too to make this even simpler. So rather than having 4 lines in our CSS, if we comment this out, we can use grid row. And then for this grid row, we can add our 2 grid row values of 2 and 4, separated by a slash. And then we also have a shorthand for grid column, which, as you may have guessed, is the 2 grid column sizes of 3 and then 5. And if we now take a look at this, after the reload, everything still looks the same, but instead we now have this over 2 lines. Finally, there is an even shorter version too, called grid area. So let's also comment out these 2 lines here. And then below this, we can add grid area. But this time we add our 4 values. We do need to be careful though, because the first 2 values are our 2 starting positions. So the first one is the row start, and then we have column start. So the first 2 values are 2 and then 3. So 2, then 3. Then the last 2 are our 2 ending positions, which is this one of 4 and then 5. So 4 and then 5. And then again, we should see no difference inside the browser. But this time the CSS is just on 1 line, but do be careful of the order of which we add the 4 values. Grid also provides us with the span keyword too. This allows us to specify the line we want to start on, then how many rows or columns we want to span across. If we wanted our example to also take up this bottom row too, down here, we could start at position 2, as we already do, then span across our 3 rows, so 1, 2 and 3. Back over to our grid area. Instead of the row end to be set to 4, we can then say span across 3 rows. See how this looks. Okay, good. So now we start at the same position and span 1, 2 and 3. Spanning across multiple tracks like this is really useful for laying out our web pages. For example, we could span across the top row to create a header area, or section off an area for the sidebar and also a main section. This is it now for line numbers, and I'll see you in the next video.